There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with part 2 of my Canadian book haul. I will put a link in the show notes to part 1, and let's get started. So most of what's left are books that I pulled out of storage, some of which I flashed like this in some unboxing videos, which may or may not have gone up when you see this, but here I will talk about the books in greater detail, and there's a substantial amount of them that I never showed in those videos, so it's mostly new stuff, and at the very end a little bit more of purchases in Canada. First is my J.R. Ackerly collection. J.R. Ackerly was a openly gay, he would probably have used the term homosexual writer in the UK, and he was born the same year as my grandmother, 1896, and died in 1967. He was out at a time when nobody else was out. So I am just so fascinated by him. So the book of his that I read and actually did some academic research analysis on during my ill-fated graduate student career is my favorite gay memoir of all time, My Father and Myself. This is a memoir. Oh, Greg, of Supposedly Fun. I think you would really, really love this. It just connected when I think of the story. So it's about him and his father. And does it say on the back? It's not. So I'm not going to reveal it, but Greg might get an inkling because of the fact that I said that it might speak to him. It's about Ackerly's life. Oh, I'd forgotten this. He was born in 1896 and his parents were married in 1919. It was a middle-class family in the UK, and he had painful experiences in World War I. Very conflicted, difficult relationship with his father, and writes very frankly about sexuality and picking up guys and the complete barrier between sex and love in his life in a way that was, I thought, really powerful. But just before his father died in 1929, Ackerly learns a secret about his father, and I actually can't remember whether his father tells him or he finds out, but that just opens up a whole area of familial and personal research and exploration, and it's just an absolutely incredible book. It's now available in an NYRB edition. This one, I marked the hell out of this for my essay for the paper. There is his father in 1890. And there they are, father and son. Here is the opening of My Father and Myself. I was born in 1896, and my parents were married in 1919. Nearly a quarter of a century may seem rather procrastinatory for making up one's mind, but I expect that the longer such rites are postponed, the less indispensable they appear, and that as the years rolled by, my parents gradually forgot the anomaly of their situation. Yeah, it's really, really, really good. I haven't read My Dog Tulip, which is his memoir about his dog. I don't think I probably ever will. I'm not interested in dogs in that way. And he loves his dog a little too much. Or I think Booktubeathon last year, I can't remember which readathon last year, I read his novel. I think this is his only novel, We Think the World of You. And I read it last year and really loved it. And I had actually forgotten that I had a copy in a box in Canada, but now I have 2 copies in Tokyo. That is not Ackerly's complete works, but those are maybe his most famous works. And here is maybe the seminal biography, I use the term advisedly, on Ackerly by Peter Parker that I bought, never read. It's a beautiful edition. I would love to read it, maybe for Nonfiction November, but I have at least one other gay writerly biography that's kind of ahead of it in line, but I'm dying to read this. And for my Alphabet Soup book tag, N is for novella, I talked about the South African writer Njabulo Ndebele, and that I had a copy or I used to have a copy of his most well-known novel, but I didn't know if I still had it. Well, I did still have it. I found it in a box. The Cry of Winnie Mandela. Is it a novel? Yep, it's a novel about South African women with Winnie Mandela's presence in the culture and the politics, waiting 27 years for Mandela, and that didn't end well, but this was written after all that came out, 2003. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Winnie Mandela. I'm a huge fan of Nelson Mandela, but this novel has always intrigued me. Next, here is a gay novel that I have such fond memories of, and I remember when I read it that I didn't think it was an absolutely stunning novel, but it had moments that really touched me, so I want to reread it. And that is The Irreversible Decline of Eddie Socket by John Weir. I think The Irreversible Decline is the main character dies of AIDS, but there's a childhood memory of his first love when he was a high school student and they were sitting in one of their trucks in the cold winter night wearing down-filled jackets, and as they were hugging or kissing or whatever, the sound of the two down-filled jackets rubbing out against each other was just so poignant to me. So I want to reread it and find that moment and see if it still speaks to me. I read this in 1991. Here's the opening paragraph. Eddie Socket had his mother's sharp, slightly prominent Anglican nose, and his father's deep-set, sentimental blue eyes and pale Irish complexion. Standard white American features, neatly arranged, but lacking authority, he felt, because of his chin. It wasn't square enough or strong enough to carry the rest of his face, which was boyish and fine. It hadn't emerged. Neither had he. He was 28 years old, but he looked and felt and probably acted 19. He was still waiting for whatever miracle he thought it would take for his real life to begin. I want to reread this. I think this is the only signed Mavis Gallant that I brought back, but I know now that I have the whole collection of my Mavis Gallant books, which she signed, and I've told that story so many times, I'm not telling it here. This one is one of her later collections, In Transit. The collection published 1988, but these stories were published in the New Yorker in the 50s and 60s. If you haven't read Mavis Gallant, I haven't raved about her recently, but she's almost as good as Alice Munro. No, they are equally good, but they're very different writers. They tie for the best short story writers in the world, hands down. William Trevor, they're up here and he's maybe here. Here's the opening to one story that I recognize from this collection. I didn't read it in this collection. I have not read this collection, but it's the title story, and I read it in another collection, In Transit. And it's an incredible story. After the Cook's party of 25 Japanese tourists had departed for Oslo, only 4 people were left in the waiting room of the Helsinki airport. A young French couple named Perigny, who had not been married long, and an elderly pair who were identifiably American. When they were sure that the young people 2 benches forward could not understand them, the old people went on with a permanent flowing quarrel. The man had the habit of reading signs out loud, though perhaps he did it only to madden his wife. He read the signs over the 3 doors leading out to the field. Oslo, Amsterdam, Copenhagen. I don't see Stockholm. She replied, "What I wonder is what I have been to you all these years." Gah! Marian Engel was a Canadian writer who died too young, around 1980 maybe, and she is most famous for her novella called The Bear. I think it's called The Bear. Anyway, it's about a woman that has sex with a bear, and I have no interest in... It's just called Bear. And I'm sorry, I just don't want to read it. I'm not interested. But I'm interested in her. So I had this novella, The Glass Sea, in another box that never got unboxed in any video. And so I brought this back to read. This is about a woman who becomes a nun and then gets married. Okay? Published 1978. So I will give it a try, because I have not read anything. Maybe I've read a short story or 2 along the way, but I have not read any of her novel or novella length works. Audrey Thomas is primarily a short story writer and another American-Canadian writer. She is still alive. The last time I checked, I hope she is, but she must be in her mid-80s, living on Galliano Island off the coast of British Columbia. And she has lived more than half her life in Canada, published several collections of short stories, a couple novels too. I've never heard much about her novels, but I love her short stories with all my heart. Not every story. She is not a Mavis Gallant or Alice Munro, but she is up there, and she does not get the attention she deserves. And, you know, she's probably one of those writers that, well, she's already kind of disappeared from the cultural landscape. But I'm going to do my small part to keep her in your minds. And this is a collection. I bought another copy here in Japan. Where the hell did I find it in Japan? I have no idea. Of these cheap little pocketbook size new, what are they? New Canadian Library edition of her stories, Two in the Bush and other stories. But this is my original copy, which she signed in 1990 when I lived. Whoa! I thought she signed it in. I thought she signed it when I lived in Toronto, but I didn't live in Toronto in 1990. I lived in Edmonton. She came to Edmonton. I had forgotten that. I think I'd been at another reading of hers in Toronto later on. Maybe not. So it makes more sense. Edmonton's closer to where she lives. And I can't remember if I read any of these stories. Many of her stories are as good as Alice Munro or Mavis Gallant, I think. And I am going to proselytize and reread. And I have another hardcover edition that I guess I bought the same time. Yep, October in 1990. And it is a new collection of short stories, so new as of 1990. And I know that I don't think I ever got to this one. So I'll probably start with this one. Next, and I believe this is maybe the complete works of this writer that has a special place in my heart. He was a gay Chinese-Canadian novelist, and he just died maybe in his early 80s, 6 months ago or something like that. Wayson Choy. The only one of his I've read was, I believe, his debut, The Jade Peony. I believe 1995. At least this edition is 1995. And it is set in Vancouver, Chinatown, Vancouver, in the 30s and 40s. And the protagonist is a young gay boy. It's so touching. He was just a really open-hearted man, and just meeting him at the book launch or at the literary event I went to, just after I finished it with this really emotionally powerful ending, just meeting him was just unforgettable. So I really recommend this. I'm going to reread it. I want to do a kind of an author spotlight video when I've read more of his work, including rereading this. And this is his memoir, Paper Shadows, A Chinatown Childhood, in which he signed and inscribed, "Family is who loves you." Published 1999, and it is exactly what the subtitle says it is. I have not read this yet. And then I believe his last novel, this was the novel that was launched in Vancouver, All That Matters. So this would have been around 2004. And he signed it to Sean, Who Matters. Oh. And this is a sequel to The Jade Peony. I didn't remember that. The Jade Peony's opening didn't have a standalone vitality, but this one, the opening paragraph here does. When I hear the sea wind blowing through the streets of the city in the morning, I can still feel my father and the old one, together, lifting me up to perch on the railing of a swaying deck. Still feel the steady weight of father's palm braced against my chest, and Popo's thickly jacketed arm locked safely around my legs. I was 3 then, in 1926, but I can still recall their shouting in the morning chill, "Kiam Kim! Kiam Kim!" Their voices thin against the blasts of salty wind. "Hai La Gim San! Look at Gold Mountain! Look!" This is a Victorian novel that I have never read, but I had a copy kicking around, and it was in a box in Canada. Diana of the Crossways by George Meredith. And I picked it up both because I did study another of his novels, The Ordeal of Richard Feverel, 1859. And then this one he's most famous for The Egoist, which I haven't read. This one, 1885. And this is a Virgo modern classic. I didn't know they published men, but it's a very, female-centered story. And I also heard, oh dear, but it's a facsimile reprint. I haven't opened it until now. I don't know if I can read it. Look at that. Look at the font for a facsimile. I think I have to find an e-copy of it. Look at the font. Could you read a book like that with that font? I know myself. And if I don't like the font, I don't like the book. Like, I am so impressionable about font. So I brought it all the way to Japan, but I am gonna try to find a ebook copy. The other reason that it was on my radar back in the day was because when I was still living in Saskatoon, and I will not mention the other university, so that I can tell the story and protect the poor bugger's anonymity, a professor came from a prestigious Canadian university and delivered a paper at the University of Saskatchewan. And I was an undergrad. I was the star undergrad and already applying for grad school. And I ultimately went to that grad school. But this famous professor did a paper on Diana of the Crossways. And I just remember sitting in the classroom listening to it. It was a pretty good paper, but he was so shy and nervous when he was delivering it. And then when it was question and answer, he just about collapsed. Like, he took a few questions and then he said, "Any more questions? Actually, I wish you guys were all standing up here with me." It's like, I just thought, wow, I'm not the only one who, feels like a complete fake in this world. Here he's like one of, within the academic literary circles, he was like way up there, and he was so nervous and shy and unconfident. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I can do stuff in the world and just feel unconfident. I've never forgotten it, but never read the novel. And I ain't going to be reading this. That font. One more look. I can't read that font. This is a work, what is it? Is it like a memoir? Kind of like a memoir about a British woman who traveled across Western Canada in 1913 and 1914 and wrote about it. In Western Canada Before the War by Elizabeth Mitchell. And I had it in a box. Didn't remember anything about it. It's also a facsimile, but at least with nonfiction I'm not so fussy. Plus, at least it's dark enough that I can read it. Maybe I'll read it someday. These are the signed Sean Virgo short story collections. I worked with him on that volunteer project I mentioned on part 1 of this book haul in the mid-1990s. And then about 5 years later, I was living in Toronto, and he was one of the on-stage interviewers for the Harbourfront Authors Festival. And I went to that, not because I cared, I certainly don't remember which author he was interviewing, but just so I could meet him again. And I took him out for a drink or a cup of tea, I think, and he signed my books. So I think I had more, but anyway, these are the ones I brought back. Waking in Eden. Oh, and I talked about his just intensity. Here is a picture of him smoking a cigarette. That's Sean Virgo. Waking in Eden. Wormwood. And White Lies and Other Fictions +2. He signed these in 1995. I'm just going to read, sight unseen, I'm going to read you the opening paragraph of the first story in White Lies, and that story is called Bandits. Number 2 section stumbled onto the bandit camp. They were up ahead, just 3 minutes out of the swamp. Malcolm was tagging the lieutenant, eyes down, when the shooting began. A sustained burst of Sten gun fire, then an isolated shot. The 2 men found each other's eyes like schoolboys startled. The dreadful, grainy mud streaked the lieutenant's young face and clogged the light bristles below his mouth. His uniform was grey and limp upon him, weighing against his skin at shoulder and chest, dragging him down as it had all day, down to the level of his thighs, where the swamp itself still fastened on them all. They might have been 2 faces in an endless mire, imprisoned up to the chins in mud and weariness, like a fabled damnation. Well, I quite like that, and my favorite sentence is, the 2 men found each other's eyes like schoolboys startled. That's good. And most of these I did preview in my vlog, and again, so I'm just going to quickly show you a signed copy of Allen Ginsberg's Home. Oh, he put his initials there. Alice Munro biography. Alice Munro Writing Her Lives by Robert Thacker. The memoir of 3 of the lost boys from Sudan. They poured fire on us from the sky, which I have read and loved and is signed by all 3 of the men, plus the journalist who helped them write their story. It's powerful. And I don't remember, probably this was held up in an unboxing, but not on the vlog. So, Nelson Mandela's A Prisoner in the Garden, opening, it's about Nelson Mandela. A Prisoner in the Garden, opening Nelson Mandela's prison archive. So I brought this back because Britta and I will be doing a buddy read of his prison letters. Maybe for Nonfiction November, but sometime in the near future. And I thought this would be a wonderful supplement to that. It's 2005. It's kind of like almost like a coffee table book, but it's full of facsimile documents and photos and written articles about the 27 years that he was imprisoned. And it just gives me chills looking at his handwriting. Wow, oh my God. Yeah, this is just going to be incredible to refer to as Britta and I are reading the letters. I'd kind of forgotten I had it. It's published by the Nelson Mandela Foundation. And the last one from storage at the farm is this biography of Sinclair Ross, who was a closeted gay Saskatchewan novelist. As for Sinclair Ross by David Stout. His most famous novel is As for Me and My House, so there's a little witty takeoff on that is for the biography As for Sinclair Ross. And if you have seen part 2 of my Saskatchewan vlog, you will vividly remember the incredibly cluttered, dirty, overly packed used bookstore that I went to in Purdue, Saskatchewan, and here are my purchases from there. I picked up Justin Trudeau's memoir, written before he became Prime Minister, Common Ground. I've never read it. I presume it's kind of fluff, but I just really want it for the picture on the cover. Oh, and I forgot when I talked... Oh, is it the same novel? Oh my God! Okay. No, never mind. Never mind. It's all good. It's all good. That's fabulous. I just realized that I bought a second... At that bookstore, I bought a second copy. The edition looks very different of a novel that I have shown you earlier. So, Britta, this is going in the little parcel for you because I didn't realize, because it was such a different edition and the title didn't stick in my head at all. And in fact, I found my copy in a box. Yeah, no, just before. The same day that I found that book in one of my boxes, I bought the same book in a different edition at this cluttered bookshop. So, Britta, this copy's going to you so we can buddy read it. But I'm not going to tell you what it is. Last, but certainly not least, is a 19th century novel that I may well do for Victober this year by an author that I'd only vaguely heard of. I'd heard the name, but that's it. Mrs. Humphrey Ward's Helbeck of Bannisdale, 1898. And this was a really nice copy in that Dog's Breakfast of a bookstore. It's about a woman that marries a Catholic, or has a Catholic lover who imposes the strict gender bullshit rules of his faith. You know, set in, I don't know when it's set, so, but I'm not going to retract the word bullshit on her. All right, so, what do you think? Thanks for watching.